Park Jae-won had a bad habit. He cried over his own writing. Not small, polite tears. The ugly kind, where your nose runs and you make sounds that would embarrass you if anyone heard them. He had done it again last night, sitting at his desk at 2 in the morning, finishing the final draft of chapter 22 of My Heart Belongs to You, the chapter where Han Siyu died. He pressed his palm against his chest now, staring at his laptop screen. The words were still there, glowing softly in the dark room. Siyu smiled one last time, and then he was gone. You deserved better, Jae-won told the fictional man on his screen. I'm sorry. He meant it. Out of every character he had ever written in his 6 years as an author, Han Siyu was the one he was most proud of. Quiet, warm, the kind of person who put everyone else first without once asking for anything in return. Siyu existed in the story only to be a gentle older brother to the main lead, Han Min-jae. He noticed when Min-jae was sad before Min-jae said a word. He packed extra food into Min-jae's bag when it was cold. He spoke to Lee Hae-in, the man Min-jae loved, with so much grace and ease that Hae-in trusted him instantly. And then Siyu used that trust to push Hae-in and Min-jae closer together while stepping further back himself. He pushed Min-jae toward the love interest, then stepped back and faded before the story could reward him with anything real. Jae-won had written him that way on purpose. A supporting character. A plot device made to feel like a whole person so readers would grieve him properly when he was gone. But sitting here now at 2 in the morning with red eyes, Jae-won grieved him too. You wrote a good man and then killed him for a plot point, he told himself. You should be ashamed. He had tried to write Siyu a small moment of peace in his final chapter. A warm afternoon, a cup of tea, a window with sunlight. But even that had felt like a consolation prize. Like leaving flowers on a grave and calling it kindness. Get some sleep, he muttered. You are losing your mind. He closed the laptop, dragged himself to his bed, and was asleep within 30 seconds. His last thought before going under was that he wished he had written Siyu a better ending. He did not expect to open his eyes somewhere else entirely. The ceiling above him was not his ceiling. It was wooden, high, and old. There was a thin paper screen across the room letting in pale, early morning light that fell in a long rectangle across the floor. The bed under him was not a mattress or a frame. It was a floor mat, thick and warm, layered with heavy blankets that smelled like cedar and something faintly like pine resin. Jae-won sat up very fast. His head swam. He pressed both hands to the floor to steady himself and breathed through his nose for 3 counts. The way he did when a deadline panic hit. Then he looked around. The room was small and clean and deeply, specifically familiar. Not because he had ever been here in real life, but because he had written this room. He knew that small wooden chest in the corner with the brass latch that did not close all the way. He knew the ink-stained table by the window with the shallow drawer that stuck. He knew the single clay cup sitting on the windowsill that caught the morning light. He also knew, with a cold jolt, the thin scar on the back of his right hand. He had never had a scar there before. His hands were different. Longer fingers, calloused at the knuckles. The hands of someone who worked with them. He stood up, found the small bronze mirror propped against the wall near the wooden chest, and looked into it. He knew the face looking back at him. He had described it across half a paragraph in chapter 1. A face built for quiet, not beautiful in a showy way, but the kind of face you keep looking at. Dark eyes set wide apart. A mouth that sat in a natural resting expression of calm. The early lines of someone in their late 20s who had spent most of their time outdoors. It was Han Siyu. Jae-won opened his mouth. Then he closed it. Then he sat back down on the floor mat very carefully, the way a person does when the ground stops feeling reliable. No, he said out loud to the room, to no one. The room did not answer. No, 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 no. He pressed both hands against his face and breathed. He was inside his own novel. He was inside My Heart Belongs to You. And he was not the main lead. He was not Lee Hae-in, the clever, sharp-tongued love interest with the jaw Jae-won had spent 2 full paragraphs on and the dry sense of humor that readers had loved more than Jae-won expected. He was not Han Min-jae, the warm and emotionally expressive protagonist who got the best lines in every scene. He was Siyu. The brother who existed to help everyone else and die in chapter 22. Jaiwon lowered his hands and stared at the wooden ceiling for a very long time. How many chapters did he have? He knew every beat of this story. If things followed the original path, and he had no reason yet to believe they would not, Siyu had roughly 20 chapters of life remaining. In those 20 chapters, his job was to be quietly helpful, to arrange small moments between Min-jae and Haeun, to smile and step aside, and then to fall ill from the unnamed wasting sickness that Jaiwon had chosen because it was sad without being messy. He had killed Siyu for a confession scene. He had needed the grief to push Min-jae and Haeun over the edge, needed them raw and shaking and finally honest with each other at the worst possible moment. It was a technique, an emotional instrument. He had used Siyu's death the way a composer uses silence, to make everything after it louder. "I am a terrible person," Jaiwon said to the empty room. That was when the door slid open. A man stepped in carrying a low tray warm tea in a ceramic pot, a bowl of plain rice, a small dish of pickled vegetables. He moved with a calm, practiced ease, the kind that said he had done this 100 times in this exact room. He was tall, sharp eyes beneath level brows, a mouth that sat at the corner of a very small, very private smile. Those eyes found Jaiwon the moment the door opened, and something in them went soft in a way that should not have been directed at Siyu. Jaiwon's heart stopped. He knew that face. He had made that face. He had written it with the specific and deliberate intention of making readers fall halfway in love with the wrong person before realizing the right person was standing next to them. Lee Haeun, the love interest, the man Jaiwon had built from the ground up to love Han Min-jae. He was looking at Jaiwon like Jaiwon had hung every star personally. "You're awake," Haeun said. His voice was low and careful, with a texture like the first quiet hour of morning. "I was starting to worry." Jaiwon stared at him. He opened his mouth, closed it, opened it again. "Good morning," he said. Haeun set the tray down on the low table and looked at him with that expression. Attentive, warm, very still. "Did you sleep badly? You look like something startled you." "Something did," Jaiwon said honestly. Haeun waited for more. When nothing came, he simply nodded and poured the tea. Jaiwon watched him and thought, with the creeping certainty of someone who has just realized they have walked off the edge of a very high cliff. This was not in the script. Jaiwon told himself it was nothing. He sat across from Haeun at the low table, both hands around a cup of warm tea, and repeated this in his head like a mantra. "It is nothing." He looks at everyone warmly. It is simply how the character is written. And that was true technically. Haeun was attentive by nature. He was perceptive and patient and gave people his full attention in a way that felt rare. Of course he would look at Siyu with warmth. Siyu was Minji's older brother. They had known each other for years. Warmth was appropriate. Warmth was expected. The problem was that the warmth in the way Haeun looked at Jaiwon right now was not the kind Jaiwon had written for a friendly acquaintance. Jaiwon knew. He had invented the difference. He drank his tea and tried to assess the situation like an author and not like someone with a problem. Based on the light and the temperature and the way the house felt around him. Settled, quiet, a little chilly at the edges. This was early in the story. Very early. Before the festival. Before the lantern scene in chapter 6 where Min-jae first made Haeun laugh so hard he bent at the waist. Before Haeun's walls started coming down. Chapter by chapter. Brick by brick. All for the person who was supposed to be standing next to Jaiwon right now. Min-jae was not here. "Min-jae left early," Haeun said, as if reading the thought. He set down his own cup and looked at Jaiwon with that clear, calm attention. "He said he had something at the market. He'll be back by midday." "That sounds like him," Jaiwon said carefully. "It does." Haeun smiled. A real one, the kind that reached his eyes and stayed. "He never sleeps past the first light of morning when there's something interesting happening somewhere." Jaiwon had written that detail. He remembered choosing it because he wanted Min-jae to seem alive and restless and full of motion, the kind of person who pulled energy into a room. He had not expected hearing it spoken aloud by the person he built to love. Min-jae would feel like this, warm and sad at the same time, like reading your own old work and recognizing yourself in it. "I'm glad you're staying a few extra days," Haeun said then. And the words were casual, easy, the way he said most things. The house feels different when you're here. Jaiwon put down his cup. Carefully. Different how? Haein looked at the table for a moment, then back up. Quieter. But not empty. A pause. Calmer. Jaiwon's brain short-circuited. He knew that line. He had written it. It was in chapter 9, page 112 of the manuscript. And he had written it for Haein to say to Min-jae after a hard week. It was the first real crack in Haein's exterior. The line that made readers understand something was happening inside him that he had not named yet. Jaiwon had been genuinely proud of it. He had not written it for Siyu. He had not written it for this morning, this table, these 2 cups of tea. I should help with something, Jaiwon said, standing up too fast. Haein looked mildly startled. You just woke up. I've been awake for a while. Jaiwon looked around. Needing something. Anything. Is there something that needs doing? Around the house. Haein studied him for a moment with those perceptive eyes that always saw more than they showed. Then he said, the fence post in the back garden. I was going to fix it this afternoon. I'll do it now. Jaiwon walked out of the room at a pace that was technically not running. He found the garden exactly as he had written it. A small square of space with a stone path, a dormant herb bed, and the back fence with the broken post leaning inward. He stood in front of it with his hands tucked in his sleeves and tried to use the cold air to clear his head. Facts. He needed to think in facts. He was inside my heart belongs to you. He was Han Siyu. He had, at most, 20 chapters before the original story's plot tried to kill him. The illness came in chapter 16. That gave him 11 chapters. 11 chapters to find a way to push Min-jae and Haein together the way he had planned. So the story could proceed. So the love story he had spent 3 years writing could happen the way it was meant to. The problem was the way Haein had just looked at him. The problem was that Jaiwon, who knew better, who had written every word, who understood the entire architecture of this plot, had looked back. He found the small toolbox by the fence and crouched down to look at the broken post. It needed a new nail and a better brace. He could do this. He would fix the fence post, go back inside, eat breakfast like a normal person, and then spend the afternoon engineering a scene between Min-jae and Haein that put things back on the correct track. He had barely pulled out the hammer when footsteps crossed the garden. You don't have to do that, Haein said from behind him. I said I would, Jaiwon answered, and kept his eyes on the post. A pause. Then the sound of Haein crouching down on the other side of the post, his hands wrapping around the wood to hold it steady so Jaiwon could drive the nail in straight. They worked in silence. It was the most comfortable silence Jaiwon had ever been inside. Not the silence of nothing to say, the silence of 2 people who did not need to fill the space between them. He had written that kind of silence into their relationship on purpose, back when Siyu and Haein were just friendly acquaintances in chapter 2. He had written it as background detail, texture, realism. He had not expected to be sitting inside it. He drove the nail in. The post held. Thank you, Jaiwon said. You did the work, Haein said. Jaiwon looked at him. A mistake, probably, because Haein was close, and his expression in the winter morning light was doing something that Jaiwon did not have a word for from the outside of this story. He looked at Jaiwon the way a person looks at something they have been thinking about for a long time and are only now letting themselves see. Jaiwon stood up quickly and brushed dirt from his knees. This was going to be a serious problem. Han Min-jae was not a simple person, no matter how he looked. He had a face built for big emotions. Eyes that went wide when he was surprised. A mouth that stretched into grins that took up half his face. Eyebrows that communicated entire sentences on their own. He was loud in a comfortable way, the kind of loud that made rooms feel fuller. People underestimated him constantly, because someone who smiled that much and moved that fast and talked before thinking often enough did not seem like someone who watched carefully. Jaiwon had written Min-jae that way on purpose. The surprise, the reveal chapter by chapter, that Min-jae saw everything. He had thought it was a clever character construction. He had not thought about what it would feel like to be seen by him. It started on the second day. Min-jae had come home from the market with a bag of chestnuts and so much energy that the entire house seemed to shift into a higher gear when he walked in. He had immediately proposed that all 3 of them go to the East Market the following morning. He had made his argument with great drama and a significant amount of gesturing. Haein had said no. Jaiwon had said it sounded like a long walk. Min-jae had turned the full force of his personality on both of them until they gave up, which took approximately 4 minutes. The market was exactly how Jaiwon had described it. Wide lanes between wooden stalls, the smell of grilled things and citrus peel and fresh rope, people moving in every direction, color everywhere. Jaiwon walked with his hands in his sleeves and tried to look like a person who had been to this market many times and not like a writer experiencing his own scene notes in physical form. The Chapter 3 scene was supposed to happen here. The one where Min-jae made Haein laugh for the first time. Really laugh, the kind that caught Haein off guard and made him press his hand over his mouth. Jaiwon had written it as the first moment the reader understood that something was going to happen between these two. He watched for it. He stayed just a little to the side, leaving space between Min-jae and Haein, hoping the story would do what stories do and fill the space with the right scene. Instead, Haein drifted toward Jaiwon. He pointed out a persimmon stall and asked, in that quiet way of his, if Jaiwon still liked them. Jaiwon had not written Siyu's persimmon preferences. Yes, he said, because it seemed safe. Haein bought a small bag without making a thing of it, tucked them under his arm, and continued walking. On Jaiwon's other side, Min-jae watched this with large eyes and a very controlled expression. Not hurt. More like someone watching an equation on a chalkboard suddenly produce an answer they did not expect. The Chapter 3 scene did not happen. Haein laughed that afternoon anyway, but it was because Jaiwon, forgetting to be Siyu for a moment, had made a dry observation about the price of ink being higher than the price of the things written with it, which was a very Jaiwon the author thing to say and not a Siyu thing at all. Haein had gone still for half a second, surprised, and then the laugh came out, real and slightly helpless, like he had not planned it. Min-jae saw that too. That night, after dinner, after Haein had gone to check the back gate and make sure it was latched for the night, Min-jae sat beside Jaiwon near the small fire in the main room and was quiet for a while. This alone was notable. Min-jae was almost never quiet. Then he said, carefully and without looking at Jaiwon directly, Haein Hyung laughed today. People do that, Jaiwon said. He doesn't. Not like that. Not in a long time. Min-jae poked the fire with a stick. He used to before things got hard for him. But lately he keeps everything very. He searched for the word. Managed. Jaiwon looked at the fire. You did something, Min-jae said. I said something funny. It was an accident. Min-jae turned to look at him now, and the firelight caught his expression clearly. Curious, careful, and more serious than his usual mode. When did you two get close, Hyung? Like this. We've always been friendly. Not like this. He paused. I've known Haein Hyung my whole adult life. I know how he looks at people he likes and how he looks at people he's just being polite to. He poked the fire again. He doesn't look at you the way he looks at people he's just being polite to. Jaiwon stayed quiet. I'm not upset, Min-jae said, quickly and clearly, and he seemed to mean it in a way that surprised Jaiwon. There was no edge of hurt in it. If anything, he sounded almost relieved. I just need to understand what I'm looking at, because if something is changing, I want to know early. I'd rather know than not. Jaiwon looked at him, at this person he had made from words, this warm, smart, emotionally generous person, and felt something complicated move in his chest. Don't get ahead of things, Jaiwon said carefully. Nothing has been said. Things don't have to be said. Min-jae tilted his head. That's kind of the whole point. He was quiet for a moment more. Then he leaned sideways and rested his head on Jaiwon's shoulder the way he might have done 100 times before, in the life Jaiwon was now inhabiting. I missed you while you were away, Hyung. Jaiwon's chest pulled tight. He had written Min-jae to love loudly and without apology. He had not written this small, tired, ordinary gesture. The kind of love that did not announce itself. The kind that just settled its head on your shoulder because you were safe. He had given Siyu this family, this home, this boy who missed him. And then he had taken it all away in Chapter 22. I missed you too, Jaiwon said. He meant it more than he could explain. The problem with knowing the plot was simple and devastating. Knowing what was supposed to happen and being able to make it happen were two completely different things. Every morning, Jaiwon woke up and went through the list in his head. The original plan. The story as he had written it. The things that needed to occur, in the correct order, for the love story of my heart belongs to you to reach its intended ending. 1. Min-jae and Haein needed to fall in love. A slow build, chapter by chapter, each scene pushing them a little closer. 2. Siyu needed to notice, encourage it in small quiet ways, and then step back. 3. Siyu needed to get sick. Quietly, without making a fuss, the way he did everything. 4. Siyu needed to die, in chapter 22, so that Min-jae and Haein's love could find its final shape against the landscape of grief. Jaiwon was failing all 4 points with remarkable consistency. He could not figure out how to push Min-jae and Haein together without it feeling forced. Every time he tried to arrange a moment, suggesting they go somewhere together without him, steering a conversation toward Min-jae when Haein's attention drifted his way, something went sideways. Haein would end up talking to Jaiwon instead. Or Min-jae would invite Jaiwon along before Jaiwon could excuse himself. Or the moment would arrive and then pass unchanged, because the story was not cooperating. The story had opinions. He also felt fine. No sign of illness. No cold hands in the morning, no strange fatigue. He checked every day, half dreading and half relieved. In the original manuscript, the illness began in chapter 16 with a persistent chill that Siyu dismissed for 2 chapters before it became impossible to ignore. Jaiwon had researched the symptoms with care, wanting the illness to feel real and slow and cruel in the specific way that hope deferred is cruel. He knew every stage of it. He was watching for them constantly. So far, his body, Siyu's body, was stubbornly healthy, which gave him time, which was both a gift and a trap, because time inside this world meant more mornings of tea with Haein, more evenings by the fire with Min-jae talking about nothing important, more meals at the low table where Haein always sat across from Jaiwon and watched him the way Jaiwon had written him to watch people, with the patience of someone who was learning something by looking. The worst moment came on a quiet afternoon in the library. Jaiwon had escaped there after lunch, partly because he needed to think and partly because he had discovered the library was one of the few places in the house where he could exist without running into someone. He had pulled a book from the shelf at random and sat on the floor with it, trying to use the old text as a kind of distraction. He was squinting at a page that made no sense to him when the door slid open. "What are you reading?" Haein asked. "I genuinely do not know," Jaiwon admitted. Before his internal filter caught up, Haein stepped inside and came to sit beside him. Not across from him. Beside him, close enough that the warmth of him was present, and looked at the page. "That's a manual on soil drainage and crop rotation." Jaiwon looked at the cover again. "I thought it was history. The binding text is faded. Easy to misread." Haein turned the page, studying it, then reached past Jaiwon to the shelf. His arm crossing Jaiwon's line of sight, close without touching, and pulled out a different book. This one, Travel Records from a Scholar Who Went North Past the Mountains. Better reading. He held it out. Jaiwon took it. Their hands touched for 2 seconds that lasted considerably longer than 2 seconds. Jaiwon opened the book and looked at the first page. "You've changed," Haein said. Quiet and thoughtful, not accusing. Observing. "Have I?" "A little. You say what you're thinking now. Before, you would consider it for a long time first, then say a softer version." He tilted his head slightly. "Now you just say it." Jaiwon kept his eyes on the travel record. "Is that bad?" A pause. "No." Another pause, and when Haein spoke again his voice was softer. "I like it." Jaiwon turned a page he had not actually read. "I'll leave you to read," Haein said after a moment, and he stood. And he left the room with the same quiet ease he did everything. Jaiwon sat on the library floor and held the travel record in both hands and stared at nothing. He needed to be honest with himself the way he was always honest with his characters when they were lying to themselves in a scene. He was not going to be able to fix this story from the inside. He had stepped into it as a foreign element. As himself, Park Jaiwon, a person from another world with different patterns of speech and different ways of looking at things. And the story had wrapped itself around those differences instead of correcting them. He had made Haein laugh wrong. He had let Min-jae lean on him. He had fixed a fence post in a garden he had written and felt, for one quiet half-hour, like he was exactly where he was supposed to be. And now Heian was looking at him and saying things that were not in the script. He had a choice to make. He could feel the shape of it pressing in from all sides. Fight the deviation. Return the story to its track. Help Min-jae and Heian find each other the way they were supposed to. Die in Chapter 22 as written. Or let the story become something no one, including Jaiwon, had planned. He sat with that for a very long time, in the quiet of a library he had built with words, holding a book about a scholar who walked north past mountains that had never existed until Jaiwon put them on a page. The cold started on a morning when the sky was still gray before dawn. Jaiwon woke to find his fingers numb. He lay still for a moment, flexing them slowly under the blanket, telling himself it was just the temperature. The house was old, the walls thin, winter pressing in. Of course his hands were cold. That was not meaningful. He got up. He dressed. He went to help with breakfast. By afternoon, the cold had moved from his hands to his arms, and settled in his chest like a damp weight. Not pain, not yet. More like the feeling of a word you cannot quite remember. Something wrong that you cannot name. He recognized it. He had written every stage of this illness in careful detail. He had mapped the progression across 6 chapters, wanting it to feel real and slow and human. The cold in the extremities first. Then the chest. Then the fatigue, arriving in waves. Then the cough, quiet at first, the kind you could hide if you were careful about it. He was being careful. He stepped away from people when the cough came. He controlled it, kept it small, pressed his sleeve to his mouth and breathed through it and then walked back into the room like nothing had happened. He was good at managing. Siyu's body seemed designed for it. But the illness was not supposed to arrive until Chapter 16. He was in Chapter 5, maybe 6. The illness was 11 chapters early, and the only reason he could think of was that the story, or whatever governed the world he was in, was trying to compensate. He was off script. He was not playing his role. And so the story was moving the ending closer, trying to get Siyu off the board before Jaiwon could do any more damage to the original plot. He told himself not to panic. He panicked a little anyway. At 2 in the morning when the cold was worst and the house was quiet and he sat against the wall of his room and thought about what dying inside a novel actually meant. Did he go back? Did he just stop? Was there a Park Jaiwon back in his apartment staring at his laptop? Or had he already ceased to exist in the real world the moment he arrived here? He had so many questions and absolutely nowhere to find answers. And he did not tell anyone. He kept going. He ate meals. He helped in the garden. He read in the library. He had conversations with Min-jae that felt, increasingly, like conversations he had always wanted to have with a real person. He sat beside Heian in the evenings and did not mention that his hands were cold even when the fire was burning. Heian noticed anyway. Of course Heian noticed. Jaiwon had written him to notice everything. It happened at dinner, for days after the cold began. Min-jae was talking, building up to some story about the market, using his hands for emphasis, getting louder as the best part approached. Jaiwon was listening and laughing when the cold climbed up hard and sudden, and he turned away for just a moment, pressing his sleeve to his mouth, controlling it into near silence. When he turned back, Min-jae was still going. But Heian was watching him, not with his usual warmth, with a stillness that had nothing of calm underneath it, the specific stillness of a person who is feeling something large and is choosing very deliberately not to show it. After dinner, Min-jae went to bed early. He had been up before dawn and the day had caught up with him. Heian did not go to his room. He came to the main hall where Jaiwon was sitting, and he sat across from him, and he said, simply and directly, "How long?" Not a question, a request for honesty. Jaiwon looked at him. He thought about denying it. He thought about smiling and saying he was fine and redirecting the conversation. He was good at redirecting conversations. He also knew, with the certainty of someone who had written 17 different characters lie to protect the people they loved and watched every single one of them make everything worse, that this was the wrong choice. "A few days," he said. Heian's jaw tightened. Just once. Then his expression went very still. "Why didn't you say anything?" "Because it seemed manageable." That is not your decision to make for me alone. The evenness in his voice was doing a lot of work. Underneath it, Jaiwin could hear something wound tight. I would have wanted to know. I know, Jaiwin said. I'm sorry. Heian looked at him for a long, quiet moment. The fire in the small brazier nearby shifted, and the light moved across his face. Is it the same as before? He asked. The winter illness? Jaiwin did not know what Siyu's history of health looked like, but he nodded because it seemed likely. Heian exhaled, slow and controlled. You push through it every time without saying anything, and every year it takes longer to pass. Every year. So this was recurring. Jaiwin had written a slow-building illness, something that arrived in chapter 16 as if for the first time. But perhaps from Siyu's perspective, from inside the stories past that Jaiwin had never written, it had been happening for years, getting worse each time. He felt something hollow open in him at that. Siyu. Heian's voice dropped, and the name came out the way it always did when Heian said it. Held carefully, like something that mattered. Look at me. Jaiwin looked at him. You are not going to manage this alone this time. Steady. Certain. The kind of certain that was not about being right, the kind that was about refusing to leave. I am going to be here. Do you understand me? Jaiwin felt the weight of that land somewhere in the middle of his chest. I wrote you too well, he said, barely above a whisper. Heian frowned. What? Nothing. Jaiwin shook his head. I mean, you're too good. It's not fair. It's not goodness. Heian's voice was low and real. It is just that you matter to me. It has nothing to do with fair. From the hallway, Minji's voice floated in, groggy and suspicious. I can hear the emotional tension from my room, and I am too tired to come out there right now, but I want you both to know that I am aware. Jaiwin and Heian stared at each other. Go to sleep, Minjae, Jaiwin called out. I will. I just want it noted. A pause. Good night. A door slid shut. In the silence that followed, something between Jaiwin and Heian, something that had been pretending very hard to be nothing, stopped pretending. 3 nights after the illness was named, the fever had not yet arrived. Just the cold and the weight and the cough that came and went, and Jaiwin was restless enough that sitting inside felt impossible. He went out to the narrow wooden step at the back of the house, the one that looked over the garden. The sky was clear and very full of stars. He had his blanket around his shoulders and a cup of cooling tea in both hands. He had been sitting there for maybe 10 minutes when the door slid open behind him. Heian sat beside him without asking, without explaining. He simply settled on the step, close enough that their sides pressed together, and looked at the garden in the same direction Jaiwin was already looking. They sat in silence for a while. Tell me something true, Heian said. Jaiwin went very still. He knew that line. He had written that line in chapter 14 of the original manuscript for exactly this kind of moment. Heian said it to Minjae after a long argument, when both of them were too tired for walls. It was the line that cracked everything open. The line readers had put in their review titles and quoted in comments. Jaiwin had been proud of it for over a year. Heian was saying it to Jaiwin. He felt very distantly the sensation of a careful structure folding. I'm scared, Jaiwin said. The words came out before he chose them. Heian was quiet, waiting. He was always waiting in exactly the right way. Of the illness. Of what happens if it gets worse. Jaiwin watched a star through the bare branches of the persimmon tree. Of staying here and wanting things. Of leaving before I get to find out how things end. He paused. Of wanting things I'm not sure I'm allowed to want. What do you want? Heian asked. The question was simple. Heian asked it simply. And Jaiwin, who had spent his entire career writing other people's answers to that question, found that he did not have a practiced answer for himself. More time, he said. Here. He stopped. Heian's hand moved to cover his. Not sudden. Slow and deliberate and completely without pretense. With me, Heian said. Jaiwin looked down at their hands. He had cold hands and Heian's were warm, and that small ordinary fact felt, in this moment, like the most important detail in the world. This isn't how the story is supposed to go, Jaiwin said. He knew it sounded strange. He said it anyway. I don't know what story you mean, Heian said. I only know what I see. He turned so he was facing Jaiwan fully, and his eyes were very calm and very sure. I see you. I have been seeing you since you arrived, and I do not fully understand what happened, when this became what it is, but it is what it is. I am not confused about that. Jaiwan looked at him. He had made this man. He had chosen his eyes, his patience, the way he held himself, the way he went absolutely still when something mattered to him. He had chosen the specific way. Heian laughed. A little startled, a little helpless, like laughter caught him off guard because he was not expecting to feel good. He had put every good thing he knew about a person into this character. He had then handed that character to someone else's love story. You're supposed to love Min-jae, Jaiwan said. Not angry, just honest. Heian was quiet for a moment, thinking. Min-jae is my family, he said. He has been for years, and he will be for the rest of my life. I would do anything for him. He met Jaiwan's eyes. But that is not the same as what I feel when I look at you. It was supposed to be. Then something changed. His hand tightened slightly over Jaiwan's. Or perhaps it was always going to be this, and the other version was the one that was not real. Jaiwan pressed his lips together. His eyes were doing something humiliating. You're going to make me cry, he said. Is that bad? I cry terribly. It is not an attractive sight. The corner of Heian's mouth curved up. That specific, private curve that Jaiwan had written in his notes as the smile he keeps for people he trusts. I'll risk it. The laugh that came out of Jaiwan was wet and a little broken and absolutely real. He turned his hand over under Heian's so their fingers laced together, and he leaned his head back against the house wall, and he looked at the stars he had never specified in his manuscript but which were there anyway, bright and detailed and indifferent to the fact that they were inside a story. I don't know if I can stay, he said. The truth of it hurt in a clean way, like a bruise pressed. I don't know the rules here. I don't know if there is a way out or a way to stay or if one morning I just... He exhaled. I don't know. Then we start with now, Heian said. What do we have right now? Each other. Tonight. Then that is enough to start with. From inside the house, Minji's voice rang out with the clarity of someone who had been awake and listening for some time. I knew it. I could hear the emotional tension from 2 rooms away, and I was right. Both of them startled hard. Go to bed, Jaiwan called. I am so happy for you. This is genuinely wonderful news. I have suspected this for days. A pause. I am going back to sleep now. Congratulations. The sound of a door sliding shut, then sliding open again. Also, Heian Hyung, you have my full blessing, for whatever that is worth. The door shut again. Heian had his face in his free hand, shoulders shaking. Jaiwan laughed until his chest ached, and for once the ache was not from the illness. Jaiwan woke the next morning and held very still, waiting for something to punish him. Nothing did. He was still in Siyu's room. Same ceiling, same pale light through the paper screen, same smell of cedar and morning cold. The illness was still present, the weight in his chest, the numbness that crept into his fingers if he lay still too long, but it had not grown overnight. He was still here, still in this body, in this world, in this story that had gone somewhere he had never mapped. He lay there for a while and did something he had not done since arriving. He stopped trying to think like an author. He stopped plotting. He stopped tracking chapters. He stopped asking what the story needed and what his role was supposed to be and what the correct ending looked like. He just lay there and thought about last night, about Heian's hand over his, about the cold step and the warm stars and the way Min-jae had hollered his blessing from behind a door. Then he got up, dressed, and went to the kitchen. Heian was already there. He was making tea with his usual focused quiet, moving between the small stove and the table with the ease of a person who found peace in the small daily tasks. He looked up when Jaiwan came in, and the look was open and uncomplicated and so warm that Jaiwan had to put his hand briefly on the door frame to keep himself grounded. Min-jae is still asleep, Heian said. I'm surprised he didn't stay up longer, given how much energy he had last night. Heian's mouth did that small curve. He was up past midnight, actually. I heard him moving around. He set a cup in front of Jaiwin and then sat across from him. He was writing something. Letters. Lists, I think. He showed me one this morning. Things to say to someone. Heian tilted his head. He would not tell me who. Jaiwin looked at his tea. He had a strong feeling he knew who. He'll tell you when he's ready. He always does. Heian wrapped both hands around his own cup. He was quiet for a moment, and then, simply, "How do you feel this morning?" Not a pleasantry. A real question. "Better than I expected," Jaiwin said honestly. "The cold is still there, but it did not get worse overnight." Heian nodded. He did not look relieved exactly. More like a person who had been calculating something difficult and had found one variable move slightly in the better direction. "You should eat more than you have been eating. Cold like that needs fuel. That is the most practical romantic thing anyone has ever said to me." Heian looked at him with a deeply unimpressed expression that Jaiwin was charmed by against his will. "Eat your breakfast." Jaiwin was smiling into his cup when Min-jae came in, hair going in multiple directions, eyes still half closed but moving with his usual velocity. He dropped into his seat, reached for the rice, and said without preamble, "I have made a decision." "Good morning," Jaiwin said. "Good morning, yes, I have made a decision." He looked between them with his wide, firelit eyes that were now fully awake in a way his hair was not. "I am going to go to the East Market today and I am going to talk to Cha Rio." Jaiwin went still. Cha Rio. The name landed in his chest like a coin dropped into still water. Cha Rio was not in his manuscript. Jaiwin had not written a Cha Rio. He had not written a map seller at all. He had written Min-jae as a character whose emotional journey was about learning to love and be loved in return, with Heian as the destination, and he had written the market as a setting, not as a place where someone new could appear. But someone had appeared anyway. The story had made room. "Who is Cha Rio?" Heian asked. Min-jae pointed at the table with his chopsticks. "He sells old maps in the East Market. He has been there for 2 years and I have visited his stall many times. Many, many times. He knows the name of every mountain on every map he sells, and he once argued with me for 40 minutes about a river's direction, and I think about it constantly." He said this all very fast, and then took a breath and looked at his bowl. "I think I might like him. I have thought this for a while. I am now doing something about it." Heian looked at Min-jae for a long moment. Then his expression did something gentle and wide. "Good," he said. Min-jae looked up. "That's it? Just good. What else would I say? I don't know, you might have feelings or—" Min-jae gestured vaguely. "I have feelings," Heian said. "None of them are about Cha Rio." He glanced briefly at Jaiwin, and then back at Min-jae. "Go to the market. Talk to him. Tell me how it goes." Min-jae stared at him. Then he let out a long breath, like something heavy had finally been put down. In the hallway, a few minutes later, Jaiwin found Min-jae putting on his outer coat and muttering to himself. He paused beside him. "You've known for a while," Jaiwin said quietly. "About Cha Rio." 3 months, Min-jae admitted. "Maybe 4. He tied the front of his coat and didn't quite look at Jaiwin. "I kept telling myself it was about Heian Hyung. It seemed simpler. It seemed like the story that made sense." He finally looked up. "But when I really thought about who I wanted to see every morning and who I thought about at night and who made me want to be funnier and smarter and better at arguing about rivers," he spread his hands, "it was never Heian Hyung." Jaiwin looked at him, at this person he had written to be someone else's love story. "Are you nervous?" he asked. "Extremely." Min-jae pulled his collar up. "What if Cha Rio doesn't like me back? He's let you argue with him for 40 minutes about a river." Min-jae considered this. "That's true." He pulled open the door. Cold morning air rushed in. "Wish me luck, Hyung." "You don't need it," Jaiwin said. "But good luck." Min-jae grinned, wide and bright and terrified and alive, and then he was gone. Jaiwin stood at the open door for a moment, looking at the empty path. The story was not the one he had written. The story was something better, something that had grown from what he wrote the way trees grow from soil, taking the material and turning it into something living and complicated and impossible to plan. He closed the door. Behind him, Heian said, "Tea is still warm." Jaiwan went back to the table. They sat together in the morning quiet, and Jaiwan thought, "I did not write this. I did not plan this. This is not what I intended." And then, maybe that is exactly the point. The fever arrived on a Tuesday, or what Jaiwan had decided was a Tuesday, since the world had no calendar he could check. It was not the worst he had imagined. The illness in chapter 17 of his original manuscript had a specific kind of cruelty. Slow, patient, the kind that let you believe you were better before pulling you back under. He had written it that way intentionally, wanting the reader to go through the same cycle of hope and collapse that Min-jae went through watching it happen. Living inside it was something else entirely. He spent 4 days in bed. Heian was there every morning before Jaiwan was awake, which Jaiwan only knew because he would surface from sleep to find tea already sitting on the table beside the mat, still warm, next to a folded cloth and a small ceramic pot of medicine that tasted like bark and strongly held opinions. Min-jae checked in so many times that Jaiwan eventually told him to stop knocking and just come in, which Min-jae interpreted as an invitation to sit beside the mat and provide a running commentary on his ongoing situation with Cha Ryo. "He said I had good instincts about the Eastern River," Min-jae reported on the second day, hugging his knees. "He said that was the first time anyone had argued that particular point correctly. That's basically a love confession in his language," Jaiwan said, voice rough. "That is what I thought." Min-jae pointed at him. "See? You understand these things. You always understand these things." On the third night, the fever spiked. Jaiwan drifted in and out of sleep, and the boundary between the dream state and waking was thin and unreliable. He surfaced once, fully, in the deep quiet of late night, to find the room lit only by the small oil lamp in the corner and Heian sitting beside his mat. Not sleeping, just sitting there, watching Jaiwan with an expression that had nothing managed about it. "You should sleep," Jaiwan said. His voice came out scraped and slow. "Later, Heian. Later." He pressed the back of his hand to Jaiwan's forehead, quick and practiced, then left it there, cool and steady. "Fever has gone down from an hour ago." Jaiwan closed his eyes. The hand was real and grounding and felt like the best thing he had experienced in a very long time. "If I disappear," he said, because the fever had worn through his better judgment like water through paper, "I want you to know, this is the best version of this story, the one I could not have written." Heian was quiet for a moment. "You say strange things when you're sick. I say true things when I'm sick. Different from strange. Then I'll listen." His thumb moved slightly, the barest motion against Jaiwan's hairline. "What do you mean, disappear?" Jaiwan opened his eyes and looked at him, at the face he had built from description and intention, now real and worn and sitting in lamplight with dark circles under his eyes because he had not slept properly in 3 days. "I don't know if I'm meant to be here permanently. I don't know if this world keeps me or sends me back. I don't know if there's a version of this where I get to stay and be ordinary, grow old somewhere, see how things end." Heian's expression did not break. It went still and careful, the way it did when he was feeling something large and choosing how to carry it. "Is that what you want?" "I don't know if wanting something is the same as getting it." "Want it anyway," Heian said. "Low and absolute, the kind of certain that is not about logic but about will. Want it as loudly as you can manage. We will figure out the rest after." "That is not how the world works. This world," Heian said, "does not follow rules very well. I have noticed this about it." He looked at Jaiwan with something that took up the whole room. "Stay. Fight for it. And let me fight beside you while you do." Jaiwan fell asleep holding his hand. He woke on the 5th day to no fever, clear eyes, and Min-jae sitting cross-legged at the end of his mat eating a persimmon with the expression of someone who had been waiting for him to wake up and had many things to say. "You're alive," Min-jae announced. "I seem to be," Jaiwan said, sitting up slowly. "Heian Hyung only left an hour ago. He was up all night. Please don't tell him I told you." Min-jae bit into the persimmon. "Also, I talked to Cha Ryo yesterday, while you were very sick. I needed something to do with my hands. How did it go? Min-jae smiled. Wide and private and a little shaky at the edges. He said he has been counting how many times I came back to argue with him. He had the number written down. Romantic, Jaiwon said. I thought so. Min-jae looked at him then, that careful, sharp look. The one that meant he was about to say something real. Hyung, I need to ask you something. Jaiwon waited. Who are you? Said gently. Because my brother, the real one, he was the quietest person I knew. He didn't make jokes. He didn't say what he was thinking. He loved me, but he was always a little far away, like he was watching from behind glass. He turned the persimmon in his hands. You are not like that. You are here all the way in a way he never managed to be. And you know things. He looked up. You knew Cha Rio's name before I said it. Jaiwon held very still. I think, he said slowly, that I fell into a story, one that I wrote in a different place. And everything was supposed to go a certain way, and I landed in the wrong role, and then the story changed around me. He paused. I am not Han Siu, but I have been living his life, and I don't want to leave it. Min-jae was quiet for a very long time. In the story you wrote, he said finally. How did it end? Your brother died. You and Haein grieved together. You fell in love over the grief. Min-jae absorbed this without flinching. Was it a good story? It was. I was proud of it. But it was the wrong one. Jaiwon did not answer because the answer was already there between them. Min-jae set down the persimmon. He looked at Jaiwon with those wide, clear eyes that held, underneath the expressiveness, something very old and very decided. My real brother never asked for anything. His whole life. His voice was steady and honest. I think the thing he would have wanted most, if he could have had it, was to be stayed for. He paused. I think he would want you to stay. I think he'd want someone to choose this life and mean it. Jaiwon's eyes stung so hard he pressed his knuckles against them. He breathed for a moment, in then out. Then he nodded. 3 weeks later, the cold was gone. He was still there. He woke every morning in the same room, under the same ceiling, in the same body that was becoming less Siu's and more his own with every day that passed. Or maybe they had always been closer than he knew. The story had not ended in chapter 22. Haein found him on a warm afternoon in the garden, sitting under the persimmon tree that Jaiwon had never written, but that was there anyway, reading a travel record in a language he now understood well enough to enjoy. Haein sat beside him with no announcement and no particular reason given, and Jaiwon leaned his shoulder into Haein's and turned a page. Min-jae has invited Cha Rio to dinner tonight, Haein said. I know. He told me 5 times. He's nervous. He's always nervous when it matters to him. He'll be fine. Another page. He's better at this than he thinks he is. You always know things, Haein said, warm and curious, without an edge of suspicion. He had long since decided that the mystery of how Jaiwon knew things was not a problem to solve but a detail to be accepted. The way you accept that morning comes without knowing exactly how. Jaiwon lowered the book. He looked at the garden. The fence post they had fixed together on the very first morning. The herb bed coming back to life now that the cold had broken. The sky above the back wall, blue in the specific unrepeatable way of that particular afternoon, the kind of blue he had once tried to describe in a manuscript and had not done justice to, because some things could not survive being described. They could only be seen. I wrote a story once, he said, about someone who was supposed to disappear in chapter 22. Haein was quiet, listening. He was written to be temporary, a good person who existed to help other people reach their endings. Jaiwon watched a bird land on the fence post and then lift off again. He never asked for anything. He never expected anything. He just made space for everyone else and then stepped out of it. What happened to him? Haein asked. Jaiwon turned his face up toward the light. He felt it on his skin, real warm, continuing forward into tomorrow and the day after that, into seasons he had not written in years he had not planned and a life that was not supposed to be his and was anyway. He stayed, Jaiwon said. Haein was quiet for a moment. Then his hand found Jaiwon's in the grass between them. Easy and warm and absolutely certain. Good ending, Haein said. Jaiwan smiled. The real kind. The kind that started somewhere behind his eyes and reached his mouth last. Yeah, he said. It is. From the kitchen, Minji's voice rose in a panic. Heian Hyung, the fish is doing something wrong. I'll go, Heian said, already standing. It was doing fine 10 minutes ago. Minjae called. What is happening to it? Heian looked back at Jaiwan with an expression of deep, fond suffering. Jaiwan pointed at the kitchen. Go save the fish. Heian went. Jaiwan sat alone under the persimmon tree for 1 more minute. In the afternoon light of a world he had made and then fallen into and then, against all odds and original intention, decided to keep. He thought about the version of this story that had ended in chapter 22. The quiet funeral, the grief, the 2 people finally honest with each other over a grave. It was a good story. He stood by that. But this one with a broken fence post and a map seller who counted arguments and a fish apparently doing something wrong in the kitchen, this one was better. Not because it was tidier. It was not. It had no clean arc, no planned emotional peaks, no chapter where everything resolved the way he had designed it to. It was better because it was true. And Jaiwan, who had spent his whole career building other people's love stories from the outside, finally understood something that no amount of craft or planning had ever taught him. The best stories are not the ones you write. They are the ones that happened to you while you were busy writing something else. He picked up the travel record. Turned to the next page. He had a lot of life left to read.